A lot of things have happened over the previous chapters, from 3,000-year-old facilities pertaining to the First World to immortal knights and Ragnarok itself happening. And since I was sick and wasn't able to cover them, let's go over all of these past few chapters and summarize every hidden detail, translation nuance, and important information that you may have missed. On the covers, Yamato defeats Who's Who, helping liberate the kidnapped ladies and the carpenter who built the hideout, while also recovering from him the sword that, if you remembered, he was supposed to bring to Yasuya's grave all the way in Hakumai, which should be our next stop before ending in the region of Ringo. Ulti and Page 1 are safe as well, and they ultimately ask to become Yamato's followers. After all, even with Yamato having renounced Kaido as a father, the three of them are still technically siblings, since Kaido had adopted Ulti and Page 1 from Hanafuda, the warlord who had been defeated by Ace, and this ultimately parallels Oden, who also got 2 followers from the start, so who knows if more might join Yamato. At the same time, we also see that Raizo has become the daimyo of Udon, which makes sense as he's from this region and it is where he also met Oden. This leaves one wondering who will be the daimyo of Hakumai and Ringo, though most likely they'll be Kawamatsu for Hakumai and Kiku for Ringo, considering she's from that region. As Sol pursues the kids, he reveals some more of their names, which include Mag and Ronya. Ylva is mentioned again, who is later brought up to actually be Yarl's great-great-granddaughter. Mag could potentially be named after Magni, one of the sons of Thor. Ronya may instead be named after Ronja Rovardotter, a famous Swedish fantasy book set in Viking Scandinavia, which famously got adapted into a fairly iconic Japanese anime. The giants across Elbaf try to stay connected via phone, except in this case they use a species called a Dengomushi instead of a Dendemushi, with its key difference being the fact that it's giant-sized, making it comfortably realistic for giants to communicate without needing to use minuscule Dendemushi. However, of course, its name is a pun. You see, Dendemushi are named after an old Japanese name that was used to refer to snails, except that its kanji changes the word denden or snail into electric communication, making a pun off of denwa, which is the Japanese word for phone. In this case though, the dengomushi changes the second kanji for that of words, basically translating to electric diction snail, once again trying to make a pun off of denwa, phone. The difference is that in this case it's meant to sound like dangomushi, which is the Japanese name for the pill bug. The pun is visually evident as the dengomushi does in fact look like a pill bug, with a round carapace to boot. In this communication, the giants referred that the kids are heading towards Tree Road number 8, showing that the giants have given particular numbers to the roots that connect the treasure tree atom as a way to identify them, in a similar way of how we would number roots and roads. We get a clarification for the fruits of the remaining god knights. Starting off with Summers, his fruit is indeed just what we expected, the Iba Ibanomi or thorn fruit. It is named after the word Ibara, which means thorns, usually referring to those of a rose, just like the sword he carries. Indeed, it makes him an Ibara Ningen or thorn man. It really seems to be as simple as him being able to set thorns that sting all those who try to touch them, which he can apply onto others and likely even himself, giving him quite the powerful immunity and attack power. This power quite befits his theatrical dramatic attitude, claiming that some would die for love and there's real emotion in killing. Though I wonder if this rose/thorn related power can be symbolically connected to some type of demon to make the devil pattern of Imu comfort powers consistent, much like how Gunko's arrows make her like an Itan moment devil. Similarly, Kiringam has what we expected to be a Kirin mythical power, particularly being the Ryuryunomi mythical model Kirin. Now, before getting into the details of the fruit, this name is a bit messy, particularly because the word Ryu in Japanese means dragon. However, in the past, this term was used for the fruits of dinosaurs or other soars like pterosaurs, translating as the sour fruit. The reason for this is because in Japanese, dinosaurs are referred to as kyoryu, which literally just means scary dragons. The reason for it is because in ancient China, dinosaur fossils were mistaken for being bones of dragons, and etymologically the word stuck until present day. way. So in One Piece, what were models of the source or fruit were instead written as Ryuryonomi in Japanese, what would be dragon fruit due to that etymological root, but still would be referring to source. This is also likely why Kaido's fruit is a model of the Uowonomi or fish fruit to distinguish dragons from source within this classification. However, in this case, Kirin is said to be a Ryuryonomi mythical model Kirin. This is likely because the Kirin has some dragon-like features and is sometimes associated with one, but this causes a bit of a headache in translation because Oda is likely playing into the double pun aspects of dragons and dinosaurs sharing an etymology which just doesn't communicate well in English, and I don't think in this case the Kirin is meant to be a dinosaur. So this is something that just simply gets lost in translation. This also adds an extra layer of confusion as this is an actual devil fruit and not just an innate devil power. It's still possible it could be conferred by Imu, given how Gunko has a named fruit but also has the dark flames that are native to those who have been conferred powers by Imu. As such, Kirin's power could still be granted by Imu, but I suppose in the form of a fruit. This also makes me question if the devilish abilities of the Gorosei are also just actual devil fruits conferred by Imu, or if they are the special case in particular. Same thing with Shamrock Sword only being referred to as the Kerberus rather than having a fruit name. As for how his powers work, however, it's just as we expected it, making him a dream materializing man, showing that, just as we thought, he did put the kids to sleep and materialize their fears. In this case, he pulls out Aspachi rock salt out of Summer's dream to add seasoning to their food, which seems to imply he can't pull stuff out of his own dreams, which would make sense since he'd be actually asleep, so he at least needs someone else to do it. By the way, that I can tell, Aspachi isn't a word in Japanese, but it is likely referring to a location within One Piece, and is likely meant to be a reference to the famous Appalachian salt from the mountainous region of the same name in North America, salt which is favored for its gourmet taste. In this case though, the salt bears no calories as it's just made of dreams. Summers refers to the beings that come out of the dreams Kiringan conjured as Mumas, pronounced as Muma and written as MMA. This is likely in reference to Muma, literally meaning dream devils in Japanese, or basically nightmares, demons that appear in your dreams. As they mention this in the background, you can spot the Nidhogger, a Draugr, and Nika marching forward. Interestingly, Summers continues his weird expressions, as he claims that this game they've set up is so easy that it becomes a Nuruge, which is a gamer term that is a combination between Nurui or lukewarm and Gemu, game. You may have heard similar combinations such as Kamige or God tier game or Eroge, erotic game, but it's basically a gamer term in this case for a video game that is so easy it only appears to filthy casuals and not hardcore gamers. So it definitely gives you a type of idea about the type of person that Summers is. Switching back to Loki, he mentions that the Ragnir can be lifted by others, which explains why it was left with him. This lines up with the myth of the Mjolnir, where only those who are worthy can lift it. Similarly, the Ragnir still retains some lightning around it, but I wonder how it works, if it's related to Loki's powers, or if it's some sort of mineral that retains static electricity. However, while Luffy punches him with a fairly weak, non-haki coated Gear 3rd after Zoro tells him to go easy on him, it's enough to make Lucky collapse, as he was pretending all along to be perfectly fine as a way to trick Hyrule, befitting of a trickster like him. With his helmet off, though still having his eyes covered, we see in fact that Loki's horns are due to his ancient giant heritage, different from Hyrule, likely due to their different mothers. Interestingly, Loki covered his eyes while as a kid as well, which makes me wonder as to why is the reason. However, Loki breaks his silence as he implies he indeed wasn't the one to kill his father, or at least not with bad intentions, just as we all expected. Meanwhile, the Adam tour continues as Frankie and Ripley reach a place called the Facility or Shisetsu, hidden within the groves of the Adam tree. This is an ancient scientific looking building that has supposedly existed here in Elbaf since times of old, to the point that not even the giants know what it actually is. Its old age and futuristic appearance almost certainly seem to point to the idea that this building is from the original First World, though some people have likened this building to looking like a giant robot due to the shape of its roof. If anything, I I'd have to say that it far more resembles the Third Research Institute, the laboratory from Punk Hazard, with the way it's built like a layered structure. Particularly as well, its round dome is heavily reminiscent of the architectural style of buildings on Egghead, which reinforces the fact that this building is supposed to give off some futuristic vibe. Lilith, who stumbled into the building, claims that even to her lowest estimates, the building must be over 3,000 years old, which is an astounding date to mention, but more than anything, this is Oda finally giving us some proper time frame for the first world, that of over 3,000 years ago. Now, admittedly, all this gives us is a frame of reference for a time when the first world happened, not necessarily when it ended. However, at the same time, I feel like Oda giving us this date is to give us a better frame of reference, and I don't think that enormous of a time happened between the over-industrialization of the first world and its end, particularly with the Harley stating that as people seized the Forbidden Flame, seemingly soon after it led to the apparition of the first Nika and the calamity of the Earth God and the Hellflame Serpent. So at the very least, I think this can give us a good reference that the end of the first world may have happened some 3,000 years ago. This would discount the idea that the end of the first world was in the year zero of the Kainreki calendar, or Sea Circle calendar, around 1524 years ago as we originally thought it could have been, but rather twice as much further back. While the Void Century started in 600 Kainreki, or 924 years ago, even further back than that would be the year zero. This means, however, that the Kainreki calendar may have started for a different reason, and this may explain how before it, the Tenreki calendar, or celestial calendar, mentioned by Robin in Alabasta, may have existed beforehand, fundamentally leading from a Gregorian calendar to the Tenreki calendar to the now Kainreki calendar, setting the world of One Piece in a distant 3,000 years in the future. Given how the Kainreki calendar and the Tenreki calendar mention two of the three planes the ancient weapons are named after, particularly being the underworld, the sea, and the celestial sky, I wonder if the original Gregorian calendar could here be called something like the underworld calendar or the hell calendar, particularly with the mentions of the Hellflame Serpent in the first world and whatnot. It was mentioned in the data book Yellow that the dates Robin made up for the calendar were completely made up, but we don't know for sure if the Tenreki calendar itself she did actually reference from an existing calendar or not. At the very least, this larger space of time may explain better how civilizations and races redeveloped across the centuries. With that said, it was mentioned during the Alabasta arc how the Alubarna seat of power represented 4,000 years of history, meaning that the history of the civilization of Alabasta, perhaps even before it attained that name, spanned as far back as the first world, and may have survived across both calamities. Similar is the story of Ohara's Tree of Omniscience, which is said to be 5,000 years old. Lilith is fascinated with this facility, claiming that she may want to live here, which could be the seat of her new laboratory now that Egghead is gone. However, Bonnie claims that it's amazing inside of it, suggesting there's even more fascinating ancient relics to be seen within. This prompts Frankie to head inside the facility, but unfortunately they are interrupted by one of the Mumas, being the fear of storms, particularly dangerous for it can unleash lightning that risks burning the tree and destroying this priceless historical site. After the God Knights have finished their luxurious meal, Gunko relaxes by listening to some music. She's using headphones with inscription TD on them. In case you don't remember, these are TDs, standing for tone dials, essentially the One Piece version of CDs that use technology of the tone dials from Skypiea that record noise to record music and thus resell it that way. We were particularly told about these during the return to Shabondi, where Brook was said to have surpassed over 1 million TDs in sales, which for the less populated world of One Piece and the difficulty of their distribution is actually pretty impressive. However, much like CDs, these TDs need to be pre-recorded, so they can't really stream music and they're likely not the easiest to obtain depending on the country, but not that it should be an issue for a God Knight like Gunko. When asked about what her favorite song is, however, Gunko responds with New World, which is referring of course to Soul King's iconic song that he sung during his final concert in Shabondi. Summers wonders if this is due to Gunko wishing for a newer world world, but I wonder if this ties with her fear of Nika in some form. We also got Summer's laugh, which is Gihaha. Sol tries to desperately stop the kids from going into the fire, and with it we get the names of a few others: Skadi, Olaf, and Bjorn. Skadi refers to the Jotun giant goddess known as the goddess of winter and cold, involved in a lot of ways in Viking myth, particularly being the one who tormented Loki during his imprisonment with serpent poison. Olaf was a Norse king, supposedly the grandson of King Harald, the first king of Norway, while Bjorn was both also a king and is also the old word for bear, referring to how bears were feared in Norse myth due to their incredible strength. However, his efforts are thwarted by the Fenrir, who Sol suspects may be controlled by Kiddingam, which makes me wonder if he can actually order the Mumas around. The West Village keeps getting assailed by even more Mumas as well, including the Nidhogger, a ghost, and what seems to be a Loki. Fittingly, the Nidhogger doesn't blast fire but lightning, since it is known as the Lightning Dragon, even represented in the kanji it's written with. Their attack is however stopped by Dorian Broggi, who ride into battle on the Great Erik while unleashing a Hakoku, their iconic attack from Little Garden, which translates to Conqueror Country, using the same ha as in haki to give an idea. They are joined by Gyaban, who should help balance things out a lot, though unlike Dorian Broggi, he's still continuing to drink, with a jug with the kanji for alcohol on it. But with Shamrock out of the picture, I do wonder where the real challenge this arc will come. A big part of the problem is the situation with the children, and the fire not being something you can overcome with sheer strength alone, but we'll have to see if the God Knights can still measure up as worthy rivals for the Straw Hats. Back in the underworld, Zoro and Sanji hunt down a dinosaur to provide meat for Loki with their iconic combo move, Armée de l'Air Power Shoot, with the first part translating to Air Force. And just like all the other beasts in Elbaf, this is a creature that originally appeared in Strong World, after Shiki seemingly took many aminals from this island, this one being a Groggysaurus, similar to a Diplodocus or a Brachiosaurus but with a bearded mane. Goldberg fights back by using his shield, whom he refers to as Nash, which could be translated in different ways such as Nosh or Nash. However, there's likely a wordplay here with Goldberg's own speech pattern, as he ends his sentences with shu, similar to a lisp, so Nash's name just follows that pattern. As we had assumed, it is indeed a homie, as it seemed to express, and Goldberg gives better context that it became a homie after his father tried to take down Big Mom. And this seems to have been after Big Mom left Elbaf, since she had the fruit, so it was probably around the time she was becoming a powerful pirate when giants tried to stop her, but even the warriors of Elbaf were powerless against the natural-born disaster that is Big Mom. Loki tells the group about the God Knights, mentioning the fact that if he'd made it far enough up the ladder to have fought them, then he would have gone as far as becoming king of the world. And this is befitting, as the king of the world, Imu, is the one ruling over the God Knights, but I wonder if Loki was just making an example or if he knows anything. Loki, however, also comments that he too looked up to a pirate once upon a time, where he asked him to let him on his crew. We see that this was back when Loki was still a kid, so given the fact that Loki is currently 63 years old, him looking like a 10-year-old means this must have been somewhere around age 20, so around 40 years ago. And that period of time, of course, lines up pretty well with the era of the Rocks, where legendary pirate Rox Dijebek had assembled an incredibly powerful crew to terrorize the world, until he was defeated 38 years ago in the God Valley incident. As such, this individual, who also has the same spiky hair, could very well be Rox Dijebek himself. This is reinforced by the fact there is a man telling him, "Don't tell me you used a blade when your opponent was a little kid," and in fact we can actually see a sort of knife stabbed into Loki, to which the man replies, "Shut up, Newgate." Newgate is of course referring to Whitebeard Edward Newgate, as clear by the mustache silhouette, which reinforces the idea that this really was Jebek. As a reminder, in Japanese his name is written as Jibeku, meaning the pronunciation is Jebek rather than Xebek, Zabek, or any other. This is also the first time we get to see Jebek's eyes, though they are still very shadowed, as well as his speech pattern, which is what you'd expect being the root speech pattern of a gruff pirate. Meanwhile, back at the present, the children keep marching down the tree road number 8, which in this case is also described in the chapter title as being on the Dai ni Jurinku, which generally translates to the second tree forest ward. This is similar to the subdivision terminology that is used to name Tokyo's wards or those of other cities. As they are about to burn, however, they are saved by Jinbe, who uses one of his signature moves, Ipponzeoi, that this time combined with Umigumo, Sea Clouds. Ponzeoi refers to a sumo move where an opponent is defeated with an over-the-shoulder throw, similar to the over-the-shoulder move that Jinbe makes here. However, Gunko takes note of them and so helps Thundersvar to confront the Straw Hats and potentially kidnap Colin as well, or make him pay for his interference. As she does, Nami exclaims Shinyusha, which means the intruder, but Colin replies by repeating the same, except Shin in his case is written in hiragana, which in this case makes it read like the newcomer. The joke here is that intruder is too complex of a word for a kid like Colin, so he's unable to understand the first kanji and thus misconstrues the word as newcomer instead of intruder, but this is a joke that's quite hard to convey in a translation. When Gunko mentions that she's not a human, Brook looks confused, which is later followed by the fact that he wonders if she might be one of the God Knights, though the simpler joke could be the fact that he himself isn't exactly a normal human, but a skeleton. I've seen some people wonder how Brook knows about the God Knights, but beyond the fact that he is old and cultured, the reality is that we don't know how secret the existence of the God Knights is, and by all means may be as publicly known as the Gorosei are. Nami retaliates with an attack she calls Thunder Shark Tempo, whose kanji reading is basically just the Japanese words for thunder and shark. This attack is quite fitting, however, as it obviously ties to Nami's previous history of being oppressed by the shark fishman that is Arlong, and her being able, in a sense, to take this as a way to prove her own strength. Gunko, however, makes a very interesting speech, stating that the world will one day suddenly disappear, or so it was supposed to. However, some of the human race took notice and made it known to the world. Now that it's come to this, it cannot be stopped. No one can stop it anymore. It's only a matter of time. An immense war that will engulf the entire world is about to begin. So when that time comes, who will the giants follow? You could say this is a matter that could heavily change the tides of war. This speech in turn makes reference to several iconic speeches across the series. On one hand, the claim of "it cannot be stopped" harkens back to Roger's iconic quote, "These are things that cannot be stopped: inherited will, people's dreams, and the swell of eras," while the "no one can stop it anymore" also harkens to Law's iconic speech in Punk Hazard, "I've destroyed that gear, now no one can stop it anymore." But most importantly, she claims that an immense war that will engulf the entire world is about to begin, harkening back to Whitebeard's final speech where he said, "Sengoku, you and the world government fear the immense war that will engulf the entire world one day." Worthy of note is that this immense used to describe it is also identical to the description of the immense kingdom of the Void Century, so there's certainly a level of thematic consistency intended here, since this makes it very clear that the war that Whitebeard was speaking about is just about to begin. This also pretty concisely explains the God Knights' long plan in trying to get the giants of Elbaf on their side, and the reason they were even willing to make someone like Loki a God Knight for that sake. Her speech also ties into the chapter's title, Seichu ni do ari, which translates to "within the stillness there be motion." This sentence structure may sound familiar, as it is identical as the first line of the Harley verses, such as "within the earth there be flame," except this one doesn't match any of the three, rather being a fourth unique verse made to sound like it. "Within the stillness there be motion" could be interpreted as the idea that the world was meant to sink without anyone noticing, but then the humans began to notice, began to move, and ultimately started causing a stir that resulted in this great conflict. As Gunko explains, Usopp tries to shoot her, but before he hits her, the sound effect "King" plays on screen. This is the sound effect often used for Future Sight within One Piece, especially when Katakuri used it, but you could also interpret it as a strong glare or reaction, so it's hard to say for certain. But at the very least, the sound effect provides the idea that Gunko definitely reacted to the attack, but seemingly couldn't even be bothered to dodge it. Gunko, however, regenerates herself just as the Gorosei do, showing that anyone with the mark has the power of regeneration, and potentially the perennial youth too, though we don't know if that's separate due to involving the Ope Ope no Mi, or if it is part of the regeneration. But it certainly makes the God Knights a lot more troublesome, as they are just as difficult to deal with as the Gorosei, and seemingly only a massive amount of Haki like Joy Boys can get in between their powers. Brook, however, comments to this by saying, "Being revived like that is so gross," which is obviously ironic given his circumstances, but he follows this up by
referring to her powers as the Height of Folly, which you may recall as the title of chapter 1105, but more precisely it is written with the kanji etymology of the tip of the bones to signify height, which might make it a hidden school joke. Also, Gunko's speech being overlaid with both Luffy and Loki having their bellies full definitely gives this idea that Loki is going to be following Luffy as an answer to Gunko's conundrum. Gunko fights back by using an attack called Arroe, forcing Jinbe's Gosen Michael Araseken and Brooks Gavambon and Avant on each other. It is written with the kanji for fated arrow, but might be a pun between arrow and aloe. As she deals with the other Straw Hats too, if you look at the panel, you can see that she throws all of them off the Svar all the way down into lower Elbaf while she kidnaps Colon away. Meanwhile, Kiddingam is attacking the school while Summers is taking care of Sol, exposing his existence to the government. Summers seems to use a massive mace spiked like the thorns he generates. Summers also blames Harold screwing up for Elbaf turning into a peaceful country, which suggests that Harold was not quite the king we thought, as many of us did speculate, though it's still not clear how exactly he failed the government. Sol recognizes Summers as a Gon Knight, claiming to have seen them before, which likely was during his tenure as a vice admiral. We see then that Gunko has rounded up all the Straw Hats together and tries to force Brook to become her slave. Particularly in Japanese, she uses the word dore, or slave, but the phonetic reading is changed to mono, or thing, basically stating, become my property or slave. However, Brook replies to this with an incredibly powerful line of, I'd rather die than live without humanity. Gunko kicks Brook back, but she feels a swelling in her chest, feeling conflicted about having to hurt her idol. As Summers begins his transmission, we get a look at several other places around the Sun world. In one village, we see something that looks like a jack-o'-lantern, which isn't of Norse mythology but more Irish Celtic, but you could consider it close enough. Across the forest, we see more Droggers marching, as well as what seems to possibly be a Sea King, given its fish-like serpentine appearance, as well as a dog spider. Being completely honest, there is nothing I could find about a dog spider in Norse mythology. The closest would be the just dog Garmer that guards Hell's Gates, but the spider part may be the result of a more creative kid. We see a couple of Elbaf's other villages, such as the Craftsman Village, or Shokunin Mura in Japanese, which is a village predominantly composed by craftsmen, it seems. This makes sense as we see all in the village armed with hammers, perhaps signifying they are all like blacksmiths of sorts. The village also seems to possess more conical houses as its distinguishable architecture, and is located on the Sun World's southeastern side, so not too far from the Warrior Spring. They are attacked by what seems to be a griffin, a mix between a lion and an eagle, and the namesake of Shanks' sword. Griffins are usually depicted as having the head of an eagle and body of a lion, but plenty of depictions do also show them with the head of a lion like we see here. The griffin pertains more to Greek mythology, but again, seems like a case where more global mythology was learned by the children of Elbaf. As a fun fact though, in the world of One Piece, griffins do actually exist as an animal species, as Big Mom claimed having captured one in the South Blue and keeping it in her collection of rare animals within her library in the Whole Cake Chateau. We see another village, which is the Hunter Village, or Karyudomura in Japanese, which in turn seems to be composed by hunters, with the giants wearing animal pelts and holding bows. Their houses seem to have conical roofs, even if they are covered a bit, and behind them we can see mountains as well, which we know exist within the Sun World as well, having accumulated on top of the branches. And this village is located to the northwest, placing it just above the West Village, which from what we've seen acts as the capital. Meanwhile, Summers moves along the branch on top of his thorns, which they seem to have taken the form of a snake. Behind him you can spot the defeated soul, as well as another wolf-like creature, perhaps another Fenrir or some other being, but it's too colored to say. Summers introduces himself as the Dagger from Marijois, or Kaiken in Japanese, which is an interesting way to present himself. The giant warrior parts a ship, the Great Eric, is surrounded by a bunch of Mumas, including a dog, a cow-like being, and the most fearsome of all creatures, the Mom. This causes it to crash somewhere between the Warrior Spring and the West Village, which happens to be close to the facility where Ripley, Frankie, Lilith, and Bonnie were at, giving us a general idea of where that is located. Anjay rounds up the names of the kids, so we might as well go through them. First is Yilva and Skadi, who we were already told about earlier, so I won't repeat myself. Then is Olaf, who is actually Oimo's grandkid and is a Scandinavian name that was historically famous for being an important king of Norway, actually being the great-grandson of Norway's first king Harald. Next is the negative Karin, whose name may be romanized just this way, as Karin is a Scandinavian name. Mag was mentioned earlier, as well as Ronja, who is clearly the daughter of this Viking fighting the Kraken, apparently not just from him stating it, but by their matching appearance, down to the teeth. Bent was mentioned just this chapter by his dad, who seemed to recognize the Muma as his wife, since Bent feared his mom the most, which we fittingly see here as he claims that his mom will get angry at him for this. Like the others, this is also a Scandinavian name. Then there's Johanna, a name of Hebrew origin but spread in Scandinavian countries, who seemingly claims to not have parents to be saved by, potentially being an orphan raised by the village, as is clear by her more serious demeanor. And finally is the cowardly Bjorn, who was also previously mentioned, on top of course, Colin himself, whose name may come from the famous Puerto Rican wrestlers, instead given how some giants in Albaf are named after wrestlers. Summers then asks to burn the school and the library as proof of their allegiance to save the kids, and leaves them the choice down to Jarl, who is the closest Warland has to a leader right now. This is particularly fitting since Jarl was the only survivor of the encounter between Loki and Harald, so several people have been suspecting him so far. However, in order to avoid such an atrocity from happening, both Robin and Gaban lead the front lines, with Robin wanting to protect the books of Ahara within the library, while Gaban rushes in to save his son.